Good evening, everyone. My name is John Kitevsky. I'm your host for a series called Life After Life. Wow, what a privilege to be part of this series, because we'll be covering all different topics, especially tonight's topic is, can an intelligent, educated person still believe in the Bible? Our presenter for these next 9 presentations is Geoff Youlden. Geoff Youlden is an international speaker. In fact, he recorded a series a few years ago that was on, I think it was on Channel 9 and Channel 7, the Beyond series. Now, the Beyond series was such a good series. It won 14 different awards, everything from music to location and filming and numerous different awards. It is a series that Geoff himself will talk a little bit more. Now, he has spoken on almost every continent on this planet except for Antarctica. I hear the penguins are the only ones that haven't heard him. So we look forward to his presentations. Now, you know, if you've here for the first time, we're all aware that we are living in strange times. If you're in Melbourne, we're in lockdown stage 4. And if you're around the world or different places around the world, we know that lockdown or some kind of restrictions is happening everywhere in this world. Is this something that the Bible has talked about? Has the Bible mentioned anything about these things that we are experiencing or witnessing? More and more people are saying to me, I think it's the end of the world. But is it really? We want to know, does this mean Jesus is coming soon? And who is the Antichrist? Have you heard about that? In the Bible talks about the Antichrist. Is the Antichrist a person or what is the Antichrist? Geoff will be covering the Antichrist. Also, if Christ is coming, when is he coming? And how can I be ready? There's going to be a vast number of different topics covered in the next 3 weeks. In fact, every Friday night at 7:30, and every Saturday at 11:30 in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So every weekend, 3 presentations for 3 weekends. So every Friday night, book it out. 7:30 at night and Saturday at 11:30 in the morning and 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. 3 presentations. Now, as Geoff speaks every night, you'll probably think to yourself, I have a question for this man. Now, many of you are watching this on Facebook, and others are watching this on YouTube, I guess, or beyond Patmos. I would like to encourage you, if you have any questions, type up your questions on the Facebook account that you're on and send it through. And between Geoff and myself, we will try to answer the questions. Now, I'll read them out to Geoff and he will answer them. But if you don't have a Facebook account, then we'll also have a mobile phone number across the bottom of the screen. I can see it now appearing. And this mobile phone number is there. If you have a question, text your question to us and we'll endeavor to answer your questions. Tonight there will be no question and answer. Tonight it will be just your questions. Tomorrow at 11:30 we'll have the first group of questions, and at 2 o'clock the next group of questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to text. This is a live program. This is not a pre-recorded program. You're watching this at this very time from Geoff is in Sydney and I am in Melbourne. Now, also, I would like to announce that we have a gift for you. If you are able to stay with us for the 9 sessions, it's going to be very easy because, you know, we're home anyway. And if you have any questions for Geoff, if you watch the 9 presentations, every time Geoff speaks, there'll be a secret code word. Like tonight's code word, I don't know what it is. Geoff will say, tonight's secret code word is, and he'll say it. And then you write that down. And now he will make it very plain, very clear if you are listening to the presentation. And then at the end of the 9 presentations, you'll have 9 different words. And those 9 different words will equal a sentence or something. And when you submit those 9 words to us, we will have a gift for you. We will not deliver it to you. We will post it out to you, and it'll be a free gift for you. We are glad that you've come. And tonight we are privileged with a special item from Sanya and Sandra singing Amazing Grace. Thank you, Sandra and Sanya.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
What a beautiful song. What a beautiful song these young ladies have sung. Thank you so much to them. Now, I'd like to introduce to you and welcome
Right.
Geoff Youlden with the topic tonight. Can an intelligent, educated person still believe in the Bible? We look forward to hearing it from you. And Geoff, thank you so much for joining us and presenting tonight. Thank you, Geoff.
Well, thank you very much, John. I very much appreciate your kind words. I just want to tell our viewers tonight that I'm a Melburnian too. I was born in Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne. All my family comes from Melbourne for generations. So I'm very familiar with Melbourne, and I'm just so upset to know that, of course, everyone's in lockdown down there. And it's because originally I was planning to come to Melbourne to run these programs from Melbourne, but that became impossible, as you know, and so we're doing it from Sydney. But I want to welcome you, and I hope that you'll be able to journey with us, because over the next 9 sessions, we're going to have a wonderful time. As John reminded us, the next program is tomorrow morning at 11:30, and then the next meeting after that is 2 o'clock tomorrow as well, and then subsequently on each weekend for the next 3 weekends. Now, John also mentioned a code word, and I want to tell you what that code is, the first word at least, in this sentence. That if you will be here each session, we'll give you a different code word that will make up a sentence. Now, the code word for tonight is the, T-H-E. So if you can remember that, write it down, because you may forget, but just put that word down. That's the first word in the sentence, the. Not very exciting word, but it's an important word, isn't it? So we'll look forward to sharing with you, and I'm sure the gift is going to thrill you very much when you receive it. Now, the year was 1943. It's a few years ago now. Not too many of our listeners were alive at that stage, but you may have remembered studying either at uni or at school. You will remember that 1943 was a time in the Second World War when the Allies were getting a bit of a hiding from Germany, and things looked pretty serious. It looked as if Germany was going to win the Second World War. But the Allies, in particular Britain, came up with a brilliant idea which was going to turn and change the history of the world, because it was this discovery or this idea that they came up with that was going to change the direction of the Second World War. You see, Spain at this time was crawling with German troops. And one day there was a jogger running along the beach, and in the early morning he noticed what appeared to be a body in the shallows of the sea, on the sand. He went over, and sure enough it was. And so he reported it to the authorities, and they came down and examined it, and they found that this fellow had a British Army uniform on. And they examined the body, of course. They examined his pockets, and they found 2 movie tickets. They found his ID. And thirdly, they found a picture of his girlfriend. Now, they presumed, of course, as you would, that he had probably been shot down in the Second World War. And so they gave him a military funeral. But attached to his arm, there was one other article, and that was an attaché case. And it had on the outside of the attaché case highly secretive information. Well, you can guess what happened with that. They wanted to find out what this highly secretive information was. And when they opened the case, they found explosive information, because it told there that the Allies were planning to invade Greece. And so this information went through all the commands in Spain, went up through Italy, then across to Hitler in Berlin. And Hitler was convinced that this was genuine, and so he moved 90,000 of his troops to Greece, ready for the Allied invasion. But of course, the Allies had no intention whatsoever of invading Greece. They wanted to invade Sicily. And of course, when the German troops were all over in Greece, they invaded Sicily, walked up through the foot of Italy, knocked off Mussolini, and then they marched across and finally got through to Berlin. And the interesting thing about this, of course, is that this misinformation completely changed the war. Now, you can probably see the submarine because the guy wasn't a British soldier at all. Actually, he was from Wales. He had died by suicide from eating rat poison. And so they dressed this guy up in a British uniform, and they, at the dead of night, they carried the body onto a submarine, and then the submarine surfaced, and they knew that the tide would take the body into the beach. And so it was a very, very clever ruse. And they put a notice in the newspaper saying he had died, so that if the Germans had checked it through, they would have found that everything seemed to add up. But it was a clever ruse. Now, it was this that changed the Second World War. And it's called in fact, they had a name for it, and it was false information. And so, like Mr. I guess Trump would say today, fake news. And it raises the question in my mind, as it probably does in yours, how can we be certain about what we believe? Ever thought about that? Because no matter what you believe, how can you or I be certain that it's true? Because the only way that you can know a thing is absolutely true would be to know everything. And I'm not sure that any of us would want to put our hand up to suggest that we know everything. And yet, in order to be able to be certain about what we believe, we would have to know everything, because if we didn't know everything, there could be information just out here that if we did know it would completely change our conclusions. And so people say to me, look, Geoff, I'm willing to accept the Bible as a good book, but there have been plenty of other good books in the world. For example, Shakespeare is inspired. Plato is inspired. The Quran is inspired. The writings of the Hindus and the Chinese, they're all inspired. They have their Bibles, you have your Bibles. One book is as good as another. This is the way many people reason. But I have a major problem with that premise, and I'll tell you what it is. The Bible makes claims that no other book makes. For example, it says that this is the word of the Lord. It says that many, many times. In fact, it says the word of the Lord came to me, that is the prophets who are writing the Bible, 2,600 times. Now, I have read Shakespeare. I've had to read Shakespeare, like many of you have had to study Shakespeare, but I have never, ever read in Shakespeare where he says, this is the word of the Lord. I've not read that in any other book of the Hindus or the Chinese or Plato or Aristotle either, because the Bible makes unique statements. Now, that doesn't make them true, of course, but it does put the Bible in a very different position than every other book, because either the Bible is true when it says, this is the word of the Lord, or it's a book full of lies. Now, you imagine that the Bible 2,600 times says, this is the word of the Lord, and if the prophets or those writing the Bible perpetuated this lie 2,600 times, that in itself has got to be quite a unique experience. So the Bible is either what it claims to be, or it's the greatest fraud that's ever been written. There is no middle ground with the Bible, because you can't say A book is a good book if it's full of 2,600 lies. That's not a good book. Now, I have other people say to me, I'm willing to accept Jesus Christ as a good man, but I can't accept him as God. There are millions of people today in the world who accept the fact that he was a good man, but they can't accept the fact that he's God. Now, once again, I've got a problem with the fact of trying to accept Jesus merely as a good man. And I'll tell you what the problem is. Jesus made claims that no other human being has ever made. First of all, he said, I've come from God. The Father and I are one. I'm going back to God. Now, they are stupendous claims because either they're right or they're wrong. Now, if Jesus was making out that these things were true and they're not true, then he was a liar too. And he told lie after lie if what he was saying was not true. So once again, I have a problem with saying that Jesus is merely a good man, because either he's what he claimed to be, the Son of God, or he's the greatest liar that ever walked. Because any person who goes around claiming that they're God, if they came up to you in the street and said, I am God, we would know that there was something not quite 100% upstairs. But when you read the writings of Jesus Christ, you don't sort of get that feeling. So once again, I say with the Bible, it's either what it claims to be or it's a great fraud. There's no middle ground. And the same is true of Jesus. Either he is what he claims to be or he is the greatest liar that ever walked the earth. You know, the Bible is a book that has been attacked by just about every skeptic that's ever lived. No other book has been more attacked than this one. And one of the biggest attacks that's made against the Bible is, people say to me, Geoff, are you trying to be really serious when you're suggesting that the Bible is a reliable book? Hasn't science completely debunked the Bible? I have many people say that to me, particularly those who are studying science, and they feel that science has completely made the Bible outdated and irrelevant. You see, the trouble with science is that science is like a chook. You know, it's losing its feathers all the time. It's changing all the time. And what is true in science today is not necessarily true tomorrow. Now, you can see the picture here of this grand museum in Paris called the Louvre, one of the most wonderful museums there is in the world. Now, inside that Louvre today, if you go there and visit it, you will find that there are 5 kilometres of books on science that are never read now. You're seeing a picture of some of them now. 5 kilometres. No one reads those books except perhaps someone who's doing a little study of what they believed 100 odd years ago or 150 years ago. But no one would seriously read them for information or for the latest discoveries or anything like that, because they're so outdated. In fact, in 1861, the French Academy of Science wrote a book in which the title was 51 Reasons Why a Scientist Cannot Believe in God. Do you know, friend, today there wouldn't be one scientist in the world who would put his or her name to any one of those 51 reasons that were given in that book, because they're all wrong. Now, at the time they were thought to be wonderful, but as more information, as we've learned more information, we've found that the conclusions that we've come to in the past are completely wrong. And so when it comes to the matter of science, the question is, which of the scientific statements that are made today are going to be still correct in 5 years' time, let alone 25 years' time? Imagine if we updated the Bible by the latest scientific discoveries. Let's say we go back to 500 years before Christ, 500 BC. If we updated the Bible by the latest discoveries of science that they all believed then, how the critics today would laugh and scoff at the Bible. believing what they believe 500 BC. Even if we updated it by the year 1000 AD after Christ, the Bible would still be an absolute nonsense, because no one believes what they were teaching 1,000 years after Christ. What about if we updated it in the year 1600 or 1700, 1800, 1900? The Bible would still be a laughing stock. When I went to school, I can remember they were very adamant that there are only 4 moons around Jupiter. Well, no one believes that now, because as the telescopes have become more powerful, we have discovered things that they didn't know years ago. And so the question comes back when we say, hasn't science made the Bible irrelevant? The question is, which statements in science are we going to say are absolutely correct and will never need to be changed? I don't think anyone, no serious scholar, would ever make that statement, because the more serious you are and the more scholarly you are, the more you realize that knowledge is changing. And what we believe today is not necessarily what we believe, what they believed once ago. Some years ago, they discovered a book by the name of Papyrus Ebers. Now, I'm very interested in archaeology, that is the study of ancient civilizations, and particularly the Egyptian civilization. And over in Egypt, in the Valley of the Kings, some years ago, they found a book called Papyrus Ebers. You can look it up on Google if you want to after the meeting. It's called Papyrus, you know how to spell that, Ebers, E-B-E-R-S. Now, the reason I'm interested in this is, and I'm sure you're going to be interested when I tell you about it, it goes back to the year 1500 years before Christ, 1552 to be exact, BC, so 3,500 years old. And when they found it, it deals with the latest medical knowledge that was available in 1552 BC. By the way, that's the very time that Moses was living in Egypt, 1500 years before Christ. Now, I was interested in reading some of the latest scientific medical knowledge that was believed and taught 1500 years BC. Listen to this. If you had an embedded splinter, it says, apply worm's blood and ass's dung. Now, because dung is loaded with tetanus spores, is it any wonder that lockjaw took a heavy toll on splinter cases? Several hundred remedies included in this Egyptian medical book included lizard's blood, swine's teeth, putrid meat, stinking fat, moisture from pig's ears, ass's hooves, excreta from animals including human beings, donkeys, dogs, cats, and even flies. And here's an exact cure, I'm quoting word for word. A large beetle, cut off his head and 2 wings, warm him, put into snake fat, apply him. If then you wish to drive it away, that's the disease away, then warm his head and his 2 wings, put into snake fat, and let the man drink it. I tell you, castor oil doesn't sound so bad after all, does it? But can you imagine if Moses had been tempted to put one of the cures that they were teaching in the university when he went to the Egyptian university? Imagine if he had put one of these so-called cures in the Bible. Wouldn't the critics have a field day today? But the interesting thing is that the Bible tells us in the book of Acts, the 7th chapter and verse 22, it says, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. In other words, the Bible is saying that Moses was educated by the greatest scholars that were alive at that time in the university. He was learned in all their wisdom, so he was aware of all these latest cures, and yet he never put one of them in the Bible. How tempted he must have been at certain stages to put the latest evidence that they felt was true in the Bible, but he never did. And one of the greatest evidences of the fact that the Bible is not written only by human wisdom, but there's a divine wisdom, is the fact that the Bible medically is as up to date today as the latest medical knowledge that we have here in the Western world. Let me just give you some illustrations, because if we go over now to one of the statements made by Moses, and we find here in Leviticus chapter 7 and verse 22 and 23. Let me just read it. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, You shall not eat any fat of ox or sheep or goat." You see, while the Bible permitted the eating of certain clean food, the one thing that the Bible says through Moses that we are not to eat is animal fats. Now, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we have wondered why that is true. But today, every medical student, every one of us who ever goes to the doctor, is aware of the danger of animal fats, because animal fats clog the arteries and causes heart disease and also strokes. And it's very largely caused by eating animal fats. And I find it interesting that 3,500 years ago, God said, don't eat the fat. Even here in Australia, in the Second World War, we were still eating lard. Now, the older generation will understand when you would go down the shop and you would buy packets of lard and you would scrape it out and then spread it on your bread. That's pure animal fat. So you can imagine what that was doing to the inside of the people who ate it. And I find it just absolutely fascinating to realize that God said that 3,500 years ago. And the question I ask is, who told Moses to write that down? Let me read you some more, because that's not the only statement. Here's another statement from Moses. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, and Numbers is another one of them. This is what he says. "Everything that can endure fire, you shall put it through the fire, and it shall be clean, and it shall be purified with the water of purification. But all that cannot endure fire, you shall put through water." Now, we have a word for that today, and I'm sure you know the word. It starts with S, sterilization. And we still know that fire is the best antiseptic that we have, and water's the next best. And here, 3,500 years ago, God taught sterilization. And once again, it's only of more recent times. In fact, let me tell you, back in the 1860s in Vienna. And Vienna in the 1860s was the leading medical city in the world. 1 woman in every 6 was dying in the maternity ward, and they couldn't work out why so many women were dying, until one young doctor had the audacity to suggest that doctors ought to wash their hands. Now, those who have had a little medical background will know the procedures that are in hospitals. I've been inside the operating theatre, and to get into the operating theatre when an operation is going on, it's quite something, because you've got to dress up in the gowns and slippers, and the scrub up that takes place before you go in is something to behold, because we all recognise today the transmission of disease, and nothing could illustrate it better, of course, than COVID-19. And we're seeing that how important it is that we have disinfectant on our hands. And the Bible taught that 3,500 years ago. And so I say once again, how marvelous, how amazing it is. Let me read you something else. By the way, Semmelweis was the doctor, and they hounded him out of the medical profession because he dared to suggest that we wash our hands. And that's not that long ago. 1860 is not that long ago, and as far as world history is concerned. And here's another statement from Moses in Deuteronomy, his 5th book. He says, "Also you shall have a place outside the camp where you may go out, and you shall have an implement among your equipment. And when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it and turn and cover your refuge. Now, every Boy Scout, every person who goes out into the country understands the principle that's outlined here 3,500 years ago. But it wasn't that many years ago in Europe and England and in the inhabited countries of the world that this practice wasn't followed. Let me tell you an experience I had when I was over in Scotland. Those of you who know a little bit about Scotland know that there are two great castles at the end of the Royal Mile, and the Edinburgh Tattoo is held every year, and maybe you've seen it on television. Well, just near the Edinburgh Castle, just down maybe 50 metres, is a museum. It's one of the shops that has been preserved down from the Middle Ages. And as you go in, there's a pig that's sitting on the porch on the outside of the shop. Now, not a live pig, of course, but it's representing what every person had back in those days. When you go inside the shop or the museum, which is really a house that's been preserved, when you go inside, you realize that all of life for those people took place in practically one room. And right in the middle of the room, as you walk in, you can see a potty, because that was the toilet. They didn't have sewer. They didn't have anything that we understand as far as toilets are concerned. This potty was in the center, and it stood there until midnight every day, when they would take it out and go to the front window and then tip it out over the footpath on the outside of the house. And that brings me to something else that I saw as I walked in, and that is the shoes that they wore back in those days. They had high rise on their shoes, so that when they walked in the morning, they could walk above all the refuse that had been put there from all the potties along the street at midnight the night before, the previous night. And when I like to remind ourselves of the fact that that's not going back thousands of years ago, that is in our world, and that not that many hundreds of years ago. So it illustrates once again how the Bible taught way back 3,500 years ago to follow the practice that we still follow today when we're separated from our sewage system. Let me read you one other one I've got here from Leviticus, once again a book of Moses, and he says, "Moreover, you shall not eat any blood in any of your dwellings, whether of bird or beast. Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people." Now, once again, while God permitted the eating of certain flesh, clean flesh, he certainly forbade the eating, we're talking about the eating now, of blood. And once again, for thousands of years, we have wondered why. We've never understood why that prohibition is there. But today we do understand. Because if you go along to the doctor and you're not feeling too well and you go say, "Doctor, look, I'm just not up to scratch. Just tell me what's wrong with me. What do I need to do?" The first thing the doctor will do is to take a blood sample, and they'll send it off to the lab, because if there's something in your system that's not good and not right, it'll be in the bloodstream. And so the good Lord understood that too. That's why he wrote in the Bible that if the animal has cancer or if it has some other disease, the germs or the virus will be in the bloodstream. And no amount of cooking will get rid of some of those viruses and germs, because they would take huge amount of heat. And by that stage, there wouldn't be any meat left. So, and then of course, you have other people who like to have their meat rare, which is undercooked. And so you can see the danger that takes place when we don't follow this counsel. And today in our modern world, we have seen mad cow disease. We have seen the bird flu and the swine flu. All of these are indications that we are not immune from the transmission of disease. And of course, there are even some today who would suggest that the virus that we're all up against at the moment originated with animals in the wet markets. Whether that's true, I don't know. I'm not a scientist to know whether that's absolutely true, but certainly there are many people today in high places who believe that. And so God has given to us this information so we can be protected from premature sickness and premature disease. God is not trying to take away something that's good for us, not at all. He loves us like a parent loves their children. He wants us to have the very best in life. He wants us to enjoy life and enjoy long life. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit later in a couple of weekends' time on the subject of how to add 10 years to your life by following the counsel that has been given to us in the Bible. And I'm going to show you from science how that is being supported and backed up. Now, sometimes people say to me, well, what about hasn't the Bible been copied and copied and copied? How do you know that in the copying process the mistakes didn't creep in? You know what it's like. If I was to give you a piece of paper like this and I was to say to you, I want you to copy it for me, it is likely that many of us would make a mistake. We perhaps would misspell one of the words, or we might even leave out a line, or there's lots of things that we could do that would be incorrect. But it's very unlikely that all of us would make the same mistake in the same place. So you see, when it came to the manuscripts of the Bible, there were thousands and thousands of copies made, and all written out, by the way, by hand. And I'm going to show you a clip in just a moment of how that took place from Cambridge University. But before that, I want to share with you a clip that we have from the Beyond. Now, John mentioned this series that we have won these awards with, and if you would like to, we would be happy to make available to you this series called The Beyond. Now, I'm going to take one small clip out of one of those episodes, and I want you to have a look at this because this is down by the Dead Sea, and you've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were discovered back in 1947. And I want you to particularly notice when I interview the head of the Dead Sea Scroll Museum in Jerusalem as to what he says about those manuscripts. Listen to what we have to say, and then what he has to say about the manuscripts. There's the sound. Seems very soft for you.
Perhaps the best example of this area's ability to preserve came to light in a very unexpected way. In 1947, so the story goes, a young Bedouin boy, Mohammed the Wolf, and his cousin were out here looking for a stray goat. Thinking that the goat may have wandered into one of the many caves that dot this whole area, they decided to take a look around. Unfortunately, it was getting dark, and without torches, the boys couldn't see a whole lot. So they threw some stones into the cave to see if they could hit the goat and find it by its bleating. Well, they didn't hear the goat. Instead, they heard the sound of breaking pottery. The next morning, Mohammed returned to the cave to see what his stone had hit. What he discovered would captivate the world and change our understanding of the Bible forever. The sound Mohammed heard in the cave was the shattering of a pot. Inside the pot were scrolls, ancient handwritten documents that had remained preserved inside the cave for generations, placed there by a sect of the Jews known as the Essenes. Now, it was not the only pot or the only cave. In all, it turned out that there were 11 caves and over 900 manuscripts. The Essenes hid the scrolls during a time of religious persecution by the Romans in order to protect the scrolls from being destroyed. As scholars studied these ancient scrolls, they discovered that about half of them were handwritten copies of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. They also knew from the handwriting style that many of the documents had been written more than 100 years before the birth of Christ. For generations, scholars had argued about the Bible's reliability. In all that hand copying, had errors crept in? Had mistakes been made? And had the Bible stories become more fanciful? Well, scholars now had 2,000-year-old copies for comparison.
My role as the curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls is actually to make sure that next generation will have the chance to see the original Dead Sea Scrolls discovered by Bedouins in the 40s and to have a full grasp of the tremendous significance these original documents have for the understanding of the origin of Judaism and Christianity.
Dr. Reutman, now I guess that most visitors that come to your museum come to see the Isaiah scroll.
Yes.
Do I understand that that is practically complete?
Yes. So in Qumran were discovered out of the about 1,000 documents, but out of the 200 or even more biblical manuscript, only one is a full copy of any biblical book. And this is the marvelous Great Isaiah Scroll discovered by the Bedouins in Cave 1 by the end of 46 or beginning of 47. And it is a full version of the same biblical books you and me we have at home. All the 66 chapters of the traditional book of Isaiah are contained in this specific document, the second largest scroll ever discovered in the Judean desert.
Now that's a very exciting thing that you've just said.
Yeah, it's much more than exciting.
Because I've got a copy here of the English, of
Yes.
course, English copy of Isaiah. Let me just find it. Here it is. So what you're saying is that as I read here, could you say essentially the texts are the same?
Yes, yes, essentially it's the same. But I think though that it's very significant is also the fact, and it's not less important, that we are not dealing with archaeology. We are dealing with a living tradition. Yes. For thousands of years, this tradition was kept by people who strongly believe in the power of the word. Mm-hmm. And I think that today, in a culture that is so powerful, the image, we have no DVD of Isaiah. We don't know how the guy looked like, but we have the word. of the prophet Isaiah. And the Dead Sea Scrolls are the physical testimony of Isaiah's words. And his oracles, his message of a universal peace, pronounced 2,100 years ago in the Israel, is still relevant.
The Bible wasn't written all in one go. Its formation took over 1,500 years. Some parts were written by kings, others by fishermen, tradespeople, and farmers. The Bible includes poetry, history, parable, prophecy, and narrative. You'd think a document of that scope would be random and fragmented. So it's uncanny that a book that is so diverse, so widely translated and copied, would come together into such a cohesive narrative. Just imagine if a book today were written over 1,500 years by at least 39 different authors. What would it look like? Would there be a noticeable common thread running through it? Would it be completely consistent? In today's world, there are so many different beliefs. But beyond all these beliefs, there is a truth about God that is clearly outlined in the Bible. Essentially, the Bible follows a storyline. It tells the story of God, free, beautiful, powerful, and yet misunderstood. He can speak the world into existence, but won't force his people to love him. Harmony is shattered by catastrophe. An epic struggle takes place. Aliens are involved. A hero emerges. The villain is exposed. There is romance everywhere. Then it builds to a final showdown where truth and good win, and peace and harmony are restored to planet Earth. It appeals to the eternity that is etched into all of our hearts. It's like a map with a big red dot on it that reads, "You are here." It tells us where we came from, what's going on, and where we're headed. It's the greatest story ever told. It's no wonder this book just won't go away.
So the question comes, can the text be relied on? Now, I visited England, and we spoke to a Cambridge University scholar, and I want you to listen to what he says about the copying process and the accuracy of the text. Just listen to what he says. Now, he's Irish, so you'll have to listen carefully to his accent, but I think you'll understand it.
In 586 BC, when the Babylonians came in and decided to desolate the land, they burned everything that was burnable in the temple, and then they pulled down all of the rocks or bricks that constituted it. They took the people for 70 years captivity. When they came back from the 70 years captivity, scattered over all the world, they built little synagogues, places where they could worship and educate. And that required a Bible for each one of these synagogues, and that brought a new institution, that of the scribes.
They were fastidious. They regulated themselves as follows. They could only use clean animal skins, both to write on and even to bind the manuscripts. They could have no less than 48 and no more than 60 lines on a page. The ink must be black, of a special recipe. They must verbalize aloud each word while they're writing it. They must wipe the pen and wash their entire bodies before writing the word Jehovah, and every time they write it. There must be a revision within 30 days, and if 3 pages required correction, the entire document must be replaced. The letter, words, and paragraphs must be counted, and the document becomes invalid if 2 letters even touch each other. All documents could only be stored in sacred places, and all old and worn documents were buried with ceremonial pomp. Before the invention of the printing press, this painstaking process helped contribute to the scriptures' remarkable accuracy when compared to recent archaeological discoveries.
So you can see what he's saying there, that the accuracy of the script is absolute, because when you have so many copies made, if an error did creep in, let's say a mistake crept in every manuscript, you would soon be able to work out the mistake, because all the others would disagree with that mistake. And so that's why, even though humanly speaking, mistakes may have got in, like misspelling words and perhaps leaving something out, but because we have so many manuscripts, it was very easy to weed those mistakes out and have a very, very accurate manuscript. And as I say, these folk were almost fanatical, because they would take a bath and they would dip their pens in new ink before they wrote the word God. And as I said, they were almost fanatical in their copying process, because they regarded it as being so important. This picture that I'm going to show you now is very interesting, because it may not look interesting, but let me point out to you why I believe it's interesting. You can see there the red numbers down the bottom and the different well-known entities. For example, you've got Julius Caesar there, and Julius Caesar has 10 original manuscripts that are still available in the world. Plato has 7, is it? Yes, 7. Herodotus has 8, Demosthenes 200, and Homer 643. They're the original documents that go back to their period, their time. But on the end, you can see the number of manuscripts that we have of the New Testament alone. And you can see there the number. It's 5,686, vastly more than all the manuscripts from the ancient world put together. And I don't meet people who doubt that Julius Caesar lived. I don't have people question whether Herodotus lived. And they only have a few manuscripts upon which to base their confidence in. And yet the Bible, the New Testament, we're not talking about the Old Testament here, the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's again separate. We're talking here about the New Testament writings, where we have over 5,500. So there's plenty of evidence today. And if a person wants to have a look and be fair-minded about this and investigate it for themselves, I think there's so much evidence that would support the activity. But and this is the reason why I have so much confidence in the Bible. Let me just read you one or two other statements, because this is from the book of Job, which some would regard as the oldest book in the Bible. Listen to what it says. It says, "He stretches out the north over the empty place. He hangs the earth on nothing." Now, I find this remarkable, because way back, over 3,500 years ago, the Bible taught that the earth was suspended in space. And we didn't know that until more recent times, of course, as you know. And the earth is hung on nothing. Now, the scientists at the time that the Bible was writing these statements didn't believe that at all. In fact, you've probably seen some of the pictures of the Greeks believed that Atlas, for example, held up the world. And that's where we get our word, the name Atlas from. The Hindus had a more sophisticated plan. They believed that the earth was hung on the back of a turtle, or 4 elephants, I should say, standing on the back of a turtle. And then their imagination ran out and they couldn't think of any more. And as a result, that's what they believed at the same time that the Bible was teaching the earth was hung upon nothing. In fact, another statement from Isaiah, this is from the Dead Sea Scroll book of Isaiah, chapter 40, says, "It is he who sits upon the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers." In other words, the Bible taught thousands of years ago that the earth was round, that it wasn't flat. And we all know about people who, at the time of Christopher Columbus, he was warned not to sail his ship because he'd fall off the end. Because at that time, everyone believed that the earth was flat. I meet some people today who still think the earth is flat. But that's not true of the vast, vast majority of people. We believe exactly what the Bible says. So you see, this is why I believe a person can have confidence today in this book. We don't have to close our eyes and hope it's true. The Bible says, come, let us reason together. We can look at this, the evidence, and I'm going to present you some more and more evidence as we go through this series, because I don't want you to just listen to my opinion. I'm not here to give you my opinion, because my opinion is no more important than yours or anyone else's. But I am interested to find out what God says on the subjects that we're going to present. And that's why I want to invite you to come to each session. And as you come, you'll find it's like a serial. Each one is connected to the other until we get toward the end, and you'll see a wonderful, clear picture. And don't forget, of course, that word, that code word. And remember what it is? THE. And we're going to get a sentence together, and we'll have another one for you tomorrow morning at 11:30, and then another one at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And so I'm going to look forward very much to you being with us. I hope you can be with us and not miss a single meeting. But it's going to be a wonderful experience as we look into some of the great prophetic words and some of the great statements that are made in the Bible. Until then, I'm going to bid you good night. And before I close, I'd just like to ask the Lord to bless you as in your home, wherever you are. Dear Lord, please bless each of our viewers tonight. Give them a good rest. Waken us tomorrow morning, I pray, so that we can serve you, and bless us in our meetings, I pray, for Christ's sake. Amen. Well, God bless you, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you, Geoff. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed that presentation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. You know, it has firmed up our belief that we can trust the Bible after all these years, and God has preserved his book in such a way that it would only take a miracle. That was really nice. I really enjoyed that presentation. Don't forget, tomorrow, 11:30, can a person go so far that God cannot save him? You got to ask this question, can a person go so far? And so many of us have always have thought, probably in the past, have I gone that far? God has the answer. The Bible has the answer. And Geoff will share that with us tomorrow. And in the afternoon, the last warning. The last warning. I got to tell you, tonight was a really good presentation, but whatever you do, you don't want to miss tomorrow morning at 11:30. I can tell you, it is totally a different presentation from tonight. And invite your friends to join you on Facebook. And don't forget, if you have any questions, please text them to us, and we are more than happy to answer some of those questions. And our first question and answer session will be tomorrow morning at 11:30 with Geoff. Now, I just want to greet all those people who are in Malaysia, who are in Indonesia, who are in China watching, who are all over Australia, in different parts of the world. We know that people from all over the world are watching this presentation. We are glad you're with us. Please join us again tomorrow. And God bless you. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.